I've asked Alison to help me out today because she's been part of something that's pretty cool here in Canada, and has been working with the Evangelical Missionary Church of Canada, and has been and now she's no longer officially with them, but she is serving on the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada as their representative. So recently, Alison was involved at a symposium put on by NAITS. Now, NAITS is the North American Institute for Indigenous Theological Studies.
Well done.
Yeah, it's a long one, but it's a lot of descriptors. But it's a group that gets together annually and throughout the year, and there's all kinds of things going on. So it sounds like a lot of academic Indigenous Christians is kind of the language that we're using here. So we're talking about some pretty significant things. You were part of presenting a paper. Mm-hmm. Tell us what it was about.
Yep. Well, NAITS has shortened their title to
Fortunately.
NAITS, a learning community, because that's really what they are. It's kind of neat, but they are a degree granting organization. So they work in partnership with Tyndale and places like, they've worked with Asbury Theological Seminary, they work with Acadia Divinity School, and others granting postgraduate theology degrees from an Indigenous perspective. So that's kind of cool, right? Mm-hmm. And so they hold an annual symposium, and I'm part of the Indigenous Settler Relations Working Group with the EFC. And so we were asked, we had been kind of mulling over what our mandate was, and we had been asked by our Indigenous advisors to do our own work. So we kind of went away scratching our heads and wondering what that would look like. And in the course of kind of our exploring, we discovered that the EFC had actually been part of drafting a pretty neat agreement called the Reconciliation Proclamation. And that actually had roots in a gathering that took place in 1994. And what was happening around that time was there had been the Oka crisis, which was a land dispute, but it's kind of an interesting story, and it was very intense. It was an intense story. So when you think of what's happening in the world right now, we have our own version. And then Elijah Harper had stalled the Meech Lake Accord. And so Indigenous evangelical leaders and non-Indigenous evangelical leaders had come together to say, we need to work on this relationship. They talked about how the beginning of their conversation was kind of awkward until they started to share stories and got to know one another. That led to an invitation to be part of something called the Sacred Assembly that had been convened by Elijah Harper. So they had drafted this agreement in 1995, been significant part of drafting this agreement, but it had kind of limited engagement. And so we just started to explore what that agreement, what it had been based on, why there was limited engagement, and how we could change that moving forward.
Yeah, it's amazing, like something that was, so 1994, 95, all that was happening in Canada back then. I mean, it is interesting looking at the news and everything, how really it doesn't feel like a whole lot has changed. And and yet there's also been some amazing things that have happened, some incredible dialogue that's gone on over the last few years.
Yeah.
But so when you discovered kind of this, when the Evangelical Fellowship kind of landed on this history, their own history, kind of revisited that, this led to a lot of questions that you had for our own story here in Canada. So it's a story of disconnection. So maybe like what happened?
We've been really grateful for the EFC leadership, who have been really open and transparent, I think, about some of what might have gone wrong. But one of the focuses is that consistent sort of derailing, right? And lack of conversation and lack of engagement in Canada. And when you think about it, there was the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples. People may not know about that. But there's the Truth and Reconciliation Commission hearings, and then the 94 calls to action that came out of that, the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women Inquiry. There's been all of these presentations and invitations to engage, and often we just don't. And so it feels kind of like a political discussion, but I think we forget sometimes that as Christians living in Canada, we're shaped by the circumstances and the history, right? And so we don't use words like colonialism or settler colonialism, but we're impacted, we're shaped by that and have been shaped by that. So, I mean, we don't even know what to do with things like systemic racism, and yet there are friends who would say that that's clearly part of our life here, right? And we bristle at the thought that we would ever be accused of anything that's so terrible. So
yeah, well, when I read the paper that you presented, I found myself actually at different points being embarrassed sometimes, hearing my own language that I've used, wondering, being angry that we've overlooked some things. It just was a very unsettling kind of a look, as I had to take a look at my own kind of engagement with this, or lack of engagement, I should say.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we can talk more about that, but it's interesting when we hear about all these things in our country, I often wonder why we aren't running toward those conversations, right? Like, what's going on? We need to know about this, until I make it personal and think, someone's pointing the finger at me and thinking about something that I've done wrong. I clearly want to explain it away. I'm uncomfortable, I'm hesitant, right, to engage. And so all of those things, I think.
Yeah, like we wouldn't see it as an intentional kind of a thing. Like we go, well, I never intended, but here we are, part of a story that's gone so far beyond that, right?
And it's been convenient in my life to look the other way.
So we hear a lot of talk about, broken relationship that we have in Canada. Like what's required, I guess, to mend a broken relationship?
Well, I don't want to oversimplify it, because I think there's gravity to it. But again, when you think in personal terms and you think about who Jesus is asking us to be, we have to consider what it takes to make any relationship right, any broken relationship right. And so we can't apologize and hope to be reconciled if we don't know that we've done something wrong in the first place, right? And if I don't, I not only don't know I've done something wrong, I don't know the impact of that on somebody else, right? And so how can I be really sorry if I don't know what impact my actions have had on somebody else? Yeah,
to say sorry too early, well, it's intended, and we've seen that even just recently on the news. Groups that are, kind of have been awakened to some big things in their own, context, and so they apologize, but maybe haven't really heard everything that's been going on, right?
Right, because what if the apology requires something of me? So am I really looking to work at making that different, making it right, or am I looking to make myself feel better? So there's a caution. I don't think we can understand the impact of our actions if we don't know how to listen well, right? To listen with humility to what others are telling us. I know that I've been challenged by that in personal places in my life, but I think it's true as a collective as well. And we won't listen well if we don't come respectfully to another, right? Humbly believing that there's important things for us to know that we don't know and don't understand. So rebuilding a broken relationship will take intentionality, right? And commitment. I don't know. I think it was interesting that the most powerful thing we discovered when we looked at the 94 initial gathering, there was a lot of discussion about the relationship, about people being willing to share their stories, but others being willing to sit and listen to the reality of their experiences, to things they didn't know, and be changed by that. And that was huge impetus for wanting to move forward in a different way.
Yeah, just the stories themselves would change people's response, right?
Yeah.
So we talk about the word unsettled, and it's been around like this. It's not a new word. It's not a new term that people have been using, but I wonder, what does it mean in the context of our connection to Indigenous people of Canada?
When I started to understand myself as a settler, I thought the unsettling was so clever, that word. But it's been around a long time, and there's been lots of work done on understanding what it means to be a settler, and then the sense of being unsettled. And so that unsettling means to be loosened or moved from a settled state or condition. So being discomforted in the process of confronting how much and how profoundly our lives are structured by colonialism. I've jokingly said I had no idea what colonial meant. That's a problem, right? We have a certain understanding of ourselves, of who we are, and of how we move in the world. And another thing I've often said is that this journey of learning has changed my understanding of who I am, of the space I occupy, and of how I moved in the world. And so often we learn about a side of Canada that none of us knew existed. That's real. We didn't know about it, but, you know, was it William Wilberforce who said, once you know, you can no longer say you do not know. So, and sometimes because we didn't know, we don't want to hear any implications that we had anything to do with it. We get defensive, right? And as soon as we start to be defensive, we stop listening, and we poke holes. We listen to, I can poke holes in your stance, which isn't listening to understand, right? And so the fact is that we live as beneficiaries of a system that shaped our system and came at great cost to others. And so before we quickly, defend ourselves and say what's wrong with that, we have to understand what those benefits are and how others have paid the price so we could have them. The wriggling, the discomfort, the lack of understanding, the defensiveness, that's all part of unsettling. And can I just add?
Yeah.
We have no stamina. Often as dominant culture people, we have no stamina for someone poking at us or pointing things out to us, because it doesn't typically happen, right?
Yeah, we've used the term fatigue in the past, right? Where there's just, it seems like this is what we talk about, and there's just kind of a fatigue. And I wonder if there's almost a hopelessness. It's like you don't know what to do, and so you just kind of throw up your hands and say, well, what can I do? I'm just here in little old Didsbury, right? And yet, you've been on this journey for a long time. Learning and growing and being humbled by it, at different times, and yet also being pretty, enthused or impassioned about a lot of these things. And so it's been interesting, right, to watch that journey for you, and you related it kind of to the story of Narnia and the wardrobe in Narnia. I think it's a great example. So can you explain a bit why this reminds you of the wardrobe?
Well, I think, we're talking about all the things we don't know, which I think is an easy, it sounds harsh, but it's an excuse, really. There's, now I can't imagine how we haven't, how we're so blind to so many things. So then you become aware that there is this thing. So equate that thing to maybe the wardrobe. They become aware of a wardrobe. Then somebody happens to open the door in the back of the wardrobe, which I don't even remember how that happened. And they discover that there's a whole other world in there. And they slam the door shut, imagine, and say, no, you don't understand. There's a whole thing going on through that door. I know, I've seen it. Kind of make myself quickly the expert. Somebody else comes and cracks the door and maybe is willing to go a little farther and stand on the step. Well, they pick up the scent in the air and they hear the birds in the trees or the noises around them and look around and see the color and say, no, I've been there, actually. They go back in and I really understand. And so I equate unsettling to that point where you actually go out onto the step, down onto the sidewalk, and get lost in the world that is Narnia. And so lost that you don't know your way back again. That's unsettling. And that's the place we need to be, because there's been a whole lot of a lot going on around us that we've been unaware of.
But I think, I mean, the amazing thing about that story, of course, is that they meet Aslan, who is, you know, the Christ figure in all of that, and just to think that we meet Jesus in that place as we venture out, and while it's unsettling and scary sometimes, or, you know, there's beauty in it, there's also, you know, this humbling fear and all these things that come along, but yet there's Jesus, right? That we find him in that.
Yeah. Who's not safe.
Yeah.
But he's good.
Yeah. So as you reimagine this relationship between people, what do you think about?
This is the easy question, hey?
Oh, yeah.
No. I don't know. You know, in my notes here, I've said that this is kind of what happened to Nicodemus when he went to Jesus in the night, right? Jesus was messing with things for him. And so I imagine, what if we're less threatened, you know, and more curious? I had a chance to go to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission hearings when they were held in Edmonton. So that was 4 days of stories about the from survivors of residential schools. And I mean, as you can imagine, it's devastating and humbling, and yet the posture and the tone of that gathering was one of hope for a new way of moving forward. And I was astonished and deeply humbled by that. Mm-hmm. So I imagine what would happen if we were people who listened well, who come with curiosity about this place where we live, about the land, about the people, who bring uniquenesses, who deepen and maybe challenge our understanding of who God is and the life he invites us into, and we share that together. The picture that gets created by that in my mind is just so rich and colorful and beautiful. And I've heard it said that once we get to know people, once we get to know what makes them laugh and makes them cry, and we can begin to make their concerns for justice our own, and that would be a beginning of a new way of walking together, I think. So, all different people at a table. So you and I have, in the past, kind of appreciated the work of Father Greg Boyle, right? And he talks about radical kinship and learning from and with others.
Yeah, that idea of, well, mutuality, where there's kind of a togetherness and seeing one another as equals in this, not trying to do something for someone, but to do things with them. And I've appreciated your example in that, and just even representing our denomination in the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada, which is a partner organization of ours, and the journey that you're on with them. We look forward to seeing what's going to happen out of that. And